That's outdated thinking, Mom. The fork slipped from my fingers and hit the edge of the china, ringing like a small alarm. For a heartbeat, the whole room froze, the balsamic steam rising from the salad, the candle wobbling in its glass, the shadow of the ceiling fan slicing slow circles, and then everything moved again except me. Across the table, Zoe didn't flinch. She sat very straight, shoulders squared in that easy modern way, as if the chair had been shaped for her, and not the other way around. Her lipstick was the deep red women my age were taught not to wear unless we were going to a Christmas party. She wasn't being cruel, she was being certain. That was worse. I found my fork, my voice, and a smile that used to work on fourth graders and grown men. Outdated how, sweetheart, I only said a home feels calmer when dinner's at the table and not in front of a screen. It's not about the table, she said, and Daniel, my son, shifted in his seat like a boy who knows a quiz is coming. It's about telling me how to be a wife. I didn't say wife, I replied. The candles smelled like vanilla too sweet. I said partner. You said a good wife serves first. Her eyes didn't waver. Hazel like the fabrics I loved best, warm with flecks of gold that show up in the right light. That's not a partnership. I could feel my cheeks lift the way they do when I keep a tone from going sharp. It's not a commandment, it's courtesy. I make plates first for guests for the people I love. It's how I was raised. Exactly, she said, and I heard the needle punch through a thick seam. How you were raised. Daniel reached for her hand, a quiet nudge under the table. He's always been good at the soft gesture. He gets that from me. I put my napkin down, smoothing its corner as if it might iron out the air. Maybe I stepped wrong, I said. I only meant that you know better, she said. Another beat of silence. The mozzarella on the platter had started to dry at the edges. I had arranged the tomatoes like petals, pressed tiny leaves of basil between them with the tip of my finger, wishing presentation could count for love. I know differently, I said, lighter. There's a difference. And you assume different means better when it comes from you, she said. Zoe Daniel murmured. What she asked, not looking away from me. We keep dancing around this every time your mom visits. She makes these pronouncements. Maybe she doesn't mean them that way, but that's how they land. Pronouncements. As if I arrived with a gavel, I felt my mouth go dry. My hands wanted something to do, so I reached for the bread basket, tore a piece I didn't want, and set it beside my water glass like a prop. I thought we were just talking, I said. Families talk at dinner. It's how we learn from each other. We learn from each other by listening, she said softly, and that softness hurt more than any edge. Not by teaching. I looked at Daniel then because I needed oxygen. He gave me the smile that has gotten him through every parent-teacher conference breakup and budget meeting. Mom, we really appreciate your help, he said. We just, Zoe just wants to feel like our choices are valid even if they're not. Yours. Your choices. Mine. The word ours hung above the table like a ceiling medallion, decorative but useless. The lasagna I'd made my mother's recipe, the one that always turns out like mercy, sat on a trivet between us, gaping from where I'd cut neat squares. I had packed it with spinach because Zoe read something about iron. I texted before coming, a thing I am learning to do, and arrived on time with flowers that didn't clash with their living room. I had left my opinions at home, or thought I had, and still I had smuggled in something offensive, invisible as a draft. Tell me then, I said, keeping my voice even. What does it look like when I'm doing it right? Zoe's face softened, a ripple over the surface. It looks like you are asking what we need instead of assuming you know. I nodded because that was the correct response, the one that passes the test. Inside, an old feeling rose up, as familiar as the echo of a church hymn sung too low, the sensation of being graded by a standard written somewhere I didn't get to see. I sipped water and tasted the metal under the ice. Okay, I said. What do you need? She glanced at Daniel, and for once he didn't rescue her. She lifted her napkin, folded it in half, then half again, her thumbs careful. We need you to stop saying good and should, she said. Stop framing things as right or wrong. I know you mean well, Helen, But when you say a good wife serves first, what I hear is that I'm failing a job I didn't ask you to grade. I stared at my son's hands, broad brown knuckled the scar across the left from the year he tried to carve a chess set in secret. I sewed him a bandage cover, then little knights and pawns from scrap fabric so the gauze wouldn't catch on his t-shirts. He wore it for days proud. We made queens from buttons when the rooks came out lopsided. He had been so easily comforted then. A kiss on the crown, a sandwich cut into triangles instead of squares. I put my hand on the table to stop the memory from carrying me somewhere too soft. When I say good, I said I mean it as an aspiration, not a score. I come from a long line of women who kept the sky from falling by arranging place settings. Forgive me if I use the words I was given. Zoe's jaw loosened. I respect your history, she said. I do. But when your history walks into my kitchen and tells me which way to ladle the soup I started. I feel like my life is being edited in red pen, she finished. It was unfair, and it was true. Sometimes both live in the same room, bumping elbows in the same chair. I'll try, I said, and even I could hear the starch in it. I will. Her eyes searched my face for a long breath. Thank you. We finished dinner like people who had hit black ice and decided to keep going because stopping would make it worse. I complimented the chairs, which were comfortable and too low. She complimented the lasagna, which was perfect, but somehow tasted like the wrong answer. Daniel told a story about a coworker's cat to fill the space between what we meant and what we managed to say. When I stood to clear plates, Zoe moved faster. I've got it, she said, stacking dishes before I could stack myself. I sat back down. The candle sputtered and steadied. If I had been in my sewing room, I would have unpicked the seam and started again. But this wasn't fabric. This was a person I loved who did not want my thread in her life unless she asked. After dessert, store-bought tiramisu because she likes the taste of not making things, Daniel walked me to the door. He kissed my temple, his stubble scratched like a familiar blanket worn thin. She doesn't mean to sound harsh, he said. She doesn't, I lied. She grew up figuring it out for herself. You know, he frowned. She thinks instruction is judgment. And you, I asked. He rubbed his neck. I think you both scare me in different ways. That made me laugh, which loosened something in my ribs. We'll try not to frighten you, darling. He smiled. Drive careful. In the car, I turned off the radio and let the night soak up the sting. It was a good phrase, outdated thinking. Clean, modern, it swatted away a century like dust. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the vanilla smell had followed me home, climbing out of my hair or my memory, I couldn't tell which. The house looked as it always had at 8:30 on a weekday, one porch light, one stubborn geranium, the brass mail slot glinting like a thin smile. Inside, the clock in the hallway rocked with a confidence I envied. I set my purse on the bench and left my shoes neatly side by side, a small nod to the order that keeps me from dissolving. I made tea, honey because my mother would have. The kettle sang, and for a moment I wanted to cry simply because some things still cue up the right response. In the quiet, the day rewound itself, every word, every look. I heard my own mother, her voice a seam ripper. A good wife serves first. She said it when I was 12, leaning over a roast in a dress she made from a McCall's pattern, and she said it again when I was 21, pinning my veil and clucking at the seams she'd redone because the seamstress didn't respect the grain. And yet, for all her rules, she never served herself first. Not once. She ate standing up more times than I can count. Her love was hot plates and cold coffee and a face that turned toward you whenever you cleared your throat. She believed in God and starch and made enough food for two more, then would be there just in case. Her commandments were survival tactics disguised as table manners. I brought my tea to the sewing room because work is the language my hands speak when my mouth has offended someone. The room smelled like cotton and mild dust, the way a library smells like paper even after you've vacuumed. Bolts leaned politely against the wall, navies and creams and florals small enough to keep from screaming. The singer waited in the corner, a patient friend. I switched on the lamp, and the light hit the silver throat of the machine like noon. On the work table lay the quilt I'd started this morning, pieces cut and stacked soft triangles tacked with pins. Herringbone in the center log cabin around a border of tiny squares like a fence you can see over. I had planned to give it to them for Christmas, modern colors, clean lines to show that I can learn a new pattern. Now it looked like a translation of my intentions no one had asked to read. I threaded the needle and fed a straight seam through muscle memory, listening to the purr that has soothed me longer than any lullaby. The fabric whispered against my fingers, give, take, give, take. I kept my stitches small, and even the way Miss Colson taught us in home economics when girls were still graded on the future. She gave me an A for the apron with the rickrack. I still have it, a ridiculous pink thing that never met a real kitchen. Outdated thinking I said aloud to the machine, to my mother's ghost, to the candle that had followed me home. The needle tapped indifferent. What is outdated really? The apron, the instinct to serve, the certainty that order keeps the wolves from the door. Zoe believes the wolves can be reasoned with if you speak their language. I was taught to bolt the door and set another place at the table because sometimes wolves just need soup. My phone pinged. A text from Daniel. Thank you for coming and for trying. Love you. Not sorry. She didn't mean it. Trying. The word landed like a thimble, blunt and useful. It would keep me from bleeding if I wore it properly. Love you too, I typed. Tell Zoe the lasagna freezes well. If she wants the recipe, I can write it down without any commandments attached. 3 dots appeared, then nothing. I set the phone down beside a tin of pins and pressed the pedal. The machine surged obediently. It is not the voice of the future, a sewing machine, but it knows how to hold things together. After 2 long seams and a third I had to pick because I rushed and the line went wavy, my shoulders dropped from my ears. I reached for the scissors, their weight solid in my palm, and snipped the trailing threads. It is calming, the little sound, a crisp chick, like deciding something and letting it go. In the hallway, the clock called out 9. I shut off the lamp and the room folded itself into shadow, the machine's silver throat going back to sleep. In the kitchen, I rinsed my cup, wiped the counter, and straightened a stack of mail. The rituals plate sponge cloth stitched me back into the evening. Upstairs in bed, I imagined saying the perfect sentence next time, the one that would open something instead of closing it. I pictured Zoe at our table, not bristling, not braced. I pictured myself asking sincerely, "What do you need?" and then listening all the way to the end without offering a pattern. Before the dark took me, a memory rose me at 23 in a small apartment, catching my breath after my first day, teaching my mother, visiting with a casserole and a critique. A good wife serves. First, she said, then two, and I snapped, I'm a teacher first. She had blinked, hurt flaring, and subsided like a stove burner. That night, she ironed my blouses without being asked and left before I woke, a note on the table. You can be both. Maybe this is what the word means now. Both. In the morning, I will text Zoe and ask for coffee. In the morning, I will tell her I am learning a new pattern, and I will bring no scissors, only thread. Tonight, I will sleep beside the space Robert used to fill and let the quiet tuck itself around me like a quilt that has been washed 100 times thinner than it used to be, softer where it matters. My last thought as I drifted off was foolish and tender. I will make her a gift she didn't ask for and won't resent. Not a quilt, not a recipe. A pause long enough for her to finish her sentence. That is my modern courtesy. That is the stitch I will practice until my hands remember it. Sleep did not come easily that night. It crept around the edges like a cat waiting for me to turn off the light, cautious and unwilling. Every time I closed my eyes, Zoe's voice returned, calm but certain, young but sharp. We learned from each other by listening, not by teaching. I told myself it wasn't meant cruelly. Maybe she didn't even know how it sounded, the way the word teaching turned heavy when she said it. I used to love teaching, 30 years of guiding hands over fabric, helping girls who thought they couldn't sew a straight line discover they could. Now apparently I was a lesson no one wanted. I tossed in the sheets, the air warm despite the window being cracked. The house ticked with its old noises, the pipes, the floorboards, the refrigerator humming like a polite guest in the kitchen, and beneath it all, that familiar ache like a pulled thread somewhere deep inside. I thought I was being kind. When dawn finally came, pale and gray, I made coffee stronger than usual. The bitterness grounded me. I opened the blinds and watched the light stretch over my yard, tracing lines through the frost on the grass. In another life, this was when I'd call my husband Robert from the porch and hand him a mug. He'd stand there, shirt untucked, hair mussed, and say, "You think too much before breakfast." Helen, maybe I did. Maybe I still do. But thinking is what you're left with when no one asks anymore. By mid-morning, I found myself in the sewing room again. The quilt waited on the table, half-finished, corners clipped, neatly, threads tucked. I ran my hand over the fabric, the cool cotton soft under my fingertips. I had chosen muted colors, moss green, cream, and slate blue. Calm colors, grown-up colors. Not the bright florals I used to favor. My mother loved loud fabrics. She used to say, if you want the world to notice you wear something it can't ignore. She grew up in the Depression. She knew how to turn rags into beauty. Every scrap can serve, she'd tell me, and I believed her. Even broken things had purpose, even old ideas. I threaded the needle and began stitching, the steady sound calming me, thuk, 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 like a heartbeat trying to keep time. My stitches were even practiced. I've always believed that careful hands can fix what words can't. Maybe that's why I baked for Zoe, folded laundry for her, stocked her pantry when Daniel mentioned they were busy. I didn't think of it as interference. I thought of it as love that showed up, love that worked quietly in the background so others didn't have to. But love I was learning could feel like intrusion when it arrived uninvited. After lunch, I decided to drive into town. I needed thread, or at least that's what I told myself. What I really needed was noise, a store bell chatter, a radio playing old songs no one admits to liking. I went to Stitch and Gather, a little shop tucked between a bakery and a yoga studio. It used to be a hardware store when Robert was alive. Now everything smelled like lavender sachets and lemon polish. Morning Helen called the woman behind the counter, Mara, all silver curls and kindness. "You're out early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, pulling a spool of slate gray thread from the display. "Thought I'd stock up." "Another quilt?" she asked. I nodded. "For Daniel and Zoe." She smiled knowingly. "You're always making something for those two. It keeps my hands busy, and your heart too, I imagine." I laughed softly. "You make it sound poetic." "It's just fabric." Mara tilted her head. "Nothing's just fabric when you touch it with love." That caught me off guard. I busied myself at the checkout, slipping bills from my wallet. "Family's tricky," she went on. "My daughter-in-law and I used to step on each other's toes all the time. Turns out she just wanted me to wait until she asked for help." I glanced up. "And did you?" Eventually Mara said. "Hardest thing I ever learned. Sometimes love means sitting on your hands." Her words stayed with me long after I left the shop. When I got home, I found a voicemail blinking on the phone. Daniel's voice, quick, apologetic. "Hey, Mom, Zoe's, well, she's feeling bad about last night." "So am I, actually. You didn't do anything wrong. We just handled it badly. Anyway, we're free Sunday if you'd like to come by. Maybe brunch this time." Something casual. I played it twice, then a third time holding the phone close like it might vanish if I blinked. Brunch. That was progress, wasn't it? An olive branch, or at least a breadstick. I called back immediately, leaving a cheerful message. "Sunday sounds lovely. I'll bring fruit salad." Nothing fancy. When I hung up, my hands trembled, relief maybe, or the strange adrenaline that comes from surviving a storm. I went back to the sewing room and picked up the quilt. The pieces suddenly looked brighter. I added a new square gold this time. Something warm in the corner, a quiet reminder that even mistakes can be mended. Sunday morning arrived bright and forgiving. I woke early, baked scones, sliced strawberries, and packed everything neatly in a wicker basket. No lasagna, no good wife talk, just sweetness and silence. As I drove, I told myself to tread carefully, to listen, to be soft. Zoe opened the door before I knocked. Her hair was up her face bare, and she wore one of those loose sweaters that make women look both younger and wiser. The air smelled like coffee and cinnamon. "Hi," she said, not cold, not warm, testing the temperature. "Hi," I echoed. I lifted the basket slightly. Peace offering, a small smile. "Come in." Inside the house felt different, lighter somehow. The sun spilled across the living room, bouncing off a stack of magazines and a vase of wildflowers on the mantel. Daniel was at the stove flipping pancakes with more enthusiasm than accuracy. "Mom," he called. "You're early." "Force of habit," I said. "I brought fruit salad." "Perfect," he said. I was just about to ruin breakfast. Zoe rolled her eyes, fond but exasperated. "He thinks cooking is a sport." "It runs in the family," I said without thinking. Then I froze, worried the word family would sound like a claim. But Zoe only nodded. Apparently, it was a good start. We set the table together. She handed me plates. I arranged them carefully, resisting the urge to correct her spacing. We worked in silence, a fragile rhythm like two dancers learning steps neither had practiced. Daniel poured coffee for everyone and slid into a chair. "Look at us," he said, "a civilized brunch." "Don't jinx it," Zoe murmured. We laughed, and for a few blessed minutes it felt easy again. The clink of forks, the smell of syrup, the soft murmur of conversation like a family from one of those commercials I used to believe in. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned. "Work. Sorry." He stood already distracted. "I'll just take this quick." And just like that, we were alone again. Zoe reached for her coffee. "I'm glad you came." "So am I." "I've been thinking about what I said," she continued, eyes fixed on the mug. "I know it sounded harsh. I didn't mean to be ungrateful. I know I said. You were honest. That's brave." She smiled faintly. "Still, I could have said it better." I wanted to tell her she hadn't said anything I couldn't survive. Those words only sting when they hit a place already bruised. But instead I said, "We both have habits we're trying to unlearn." Her eyebrows lifted. "Like what?" I hesitated, then shrugged. "Like believing I know what people need before they tell me." Her expression softened. "That's actually very self-aware. Age has to be good for something." We both laughed. Then, because I can't help myself, I reached across the table to straighten the napkin by her plate. It was folded unevenly, one corner jutting out. I meant it as a gesture of care, small, reflexive, motherly, but Zoe stiffened. It was subtle, just a pause in her breath, but I felt it. The air shifted. "Oh," I said, pulling my hand back quickly. "Sorry." Force of habit. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's okay." Except it wasn't. The rest of the brunch went politely. Daniel returned cheerful but oblivious. We talked about work, about a new restaurant opening downtown. When I left, Zoe hugged me lightly, the kind of hug that says we're fine, even when you both know you're not. Driving home, I kept thinking about that napkin, how something so small could tip the balance. I'd spent decades believing attention to detail was love, that noticing was caring. Now I wondered if noticing too much was how people start to feel unseen. When I got home, I went straight to the sewing room. The quilt waited half done. I stared at it, tracing the seams with my eyes. In one corner, I'd made a mistake days ago, a square turned the wrong direction. I could fix it, unpick it, make it right, but instead I left it. Sometimes imperfection tells the truth better than symmetry. That evening, Daniel called. "Hey, Mom. Brunch was nice. It was," I said carefully. "You two seem happy." "We are," he said. "Zoe's just adjusting." "We both are." "I know." He hesitated. "She feels bad about snapping before. She said she wants to find a way to connect that doesn't make either of you feel judged." "That's kind of her." He laughed softly. "You're both kind, Mom. You just speak different dialects." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and let the words settle. Different dialects. Yes, that's what it felt like, two languages built from love, each mistranslating the other. I reached for my journal, a habit I'd abandoned after Robert died. I wrote, "Love without understanding is like sewing in the dark. You can still stitch, but you won't know until morning if you've made something beautiful or ruined it." I read it twice, then smiled. Maybe that was the lesson I'd been missing, not to stop stitching, but to wait for daylight before deciding if it was right. Outside, the first snow began to fall, slow, tentative flakes drifting past the window. I stood there watching the house behind me warm the world ahead, silent. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel outdated. I felt unfinished. And maybe that was a kind of hope. I told myself it was just a gesture, not a correction, not a lesson, just love shaped, sewn, and folded. It started with a picture Daniel sent me one evening, Zoe sitting cross legged on the living room floor, surrounded by fabric swatches. "She's redoing the bedroom," his text read. "You'd love it, Mom, very minimalist." Minimalist. That word always sounded like emptiness pretending to be elegance, but I told myself not to judge. People my age often confuse simplicity with absence. Still, as I looked at the photo, Zoe's bright hair falling over her shoulder, her brow furrowed in concentration, something in me stirred. She looked so young, so in need of guidance, even if she'd never admit it. The next morning, I wandered into my sewing room and stared at the shelves of fabric, blues, creams, soft grays, nothing loud, nothing old fashioned, the kind of palette she liked. If I could make something that matched her world, maybe she'd see that I was trying, that I could learn too. So I began. It took 2 days of cutting, ironing, and repinning. I kept the design clean, no ruffles, no lace, just straight modern lines. But in one corner, I added a detail she wouldn't notice at first, a square embroidered with tiny flowers, wild ones, unplanned, a reminder that beauty doesn't need symmetry. When I finished, I spread the quilt across my own bed and stepped back. It looked restrained, yes. Modern, yes, but cold somehow. I pressed my palm to it, smoothing the fabric as if warmth could be sewn in afterward. "She'll like it," I whispered. "She has to." I didn't call ahead. I know that was the first mistake, but I'd convinced myself it wasn't a visit. It was a delivery, just dropping something off, no intrusion, no long talk, just a gift. When I arrived, Daniel's car wasn't there, but Zoe's SUV sat in the driveway. The house looked calm, lights off, curtains half drawn. I thought about texting, but the quilt in my arms was heavy and soft, and a drizzle had started cool against my hair. 5 minutes, I told myself. 5 minutes, and I'll go. I rang the bell, waited. Nothing. So I turned the knob gently. It wasn't locked. Inside, the house was dim, filled with the faint scent of coffee and some floral candles. I stepped carefully, shoes silent on the rug. "Zoe," I called softly. "It's Helen. I just wanted to—" A sound stopped me. Not footsteps, a voice. Hers. Low, tight. She was in the next room on the phone. "I'm trying, Mom," Zoe's voice said, thin but fierce. "But it's hard. She just appears. Always with something, food advice, now furniture probably. Daniel thinks it's sweet, but it's suffocating." I froze, every word landing like a pin driven into fabric. "No, I can't tell her to stop," Zoe continued. "It would crush him. He loves her so much. And I get it. She means well. But meaning well doesn't make it less controlling." Controlling. The word hung there, sharp and ugly. I stepped back, heart hammering, but my elbow brushed the doorframe. The sound was small, a dull thud, but enough. Zoe's voice stopped. A beat, then footsteps. When she appeared, phone still in hand, her eyes went wide. "Helen," I clutched the quilt tighter. "I knocked," I said quickly. "I thought I'd leave this by the door." Her mouth opened, then closed. "You came inside? I didn't want it to get wet," I said, lifting the bundle weakly. "It's a quilt." "For your room." I saw the photo, and her expression shifted, not anger exactly, but something worse, weariness. "Helen, She said quietly, "You can't just walk in." I know I said, breath shaking. "I just wanted to surprise you." "You did," she said, voice flat. For a moment, neither of us moved. The house seemed to shrink around us, the walls closer, the air heavy. "I'll go," I said finally. I set the quilt on the nearest chair and backed toward the door. "I'm sorry, Zoe. Truly." She rubbed her temples. "I know you are. I only wanted to help." "I know," she said again, but this time it sounded like surrender. Outside, the drizzle had become rain. It soaked through my cardigan before I reached the car. I sat there, hands trembling on the wheel, watching the house blur through the windshield. For the first time, I understood love given at the wrong moment can feel like trespassing, and even gifts can bruise when they arrive uninvited. That night, Daniel called. "Mom," he began carefully. "Zoe told me you stopped by. I didn't mean to bother her." "You didn't." He sighed. "She just wasn't expecting you, I know," I said softly. "That seems to be my problem." There was silence on the line. Then gently, "She knows you care. We both do. But maybe just wait for her to reach out, okay?" "Yes," I said, though the words scraped on the way out. After we hung up, I went into the sewing room. The rain tapped against the window, steady as a metronome. On the table sat scraps from the quilt, gold blue cream bits of intention with no place left to belong. I ran a hand over them, then began cutting them smaller. Strips became squares. Squares became nothing. By midnight, the table was clean again. Sometimes you can only fix what's broken by letting it go. The next morning, the house felt too still. Even the clock seemed to tick more quietly, afraid to interrupt the silence I'd brought home. I made tea, but it tasted thin. I turned on the radio, but every song felt like someone else's memory. I kept replaying Zoe's voice, not angry, just exhausted. Meaning well doesn't make it less controlling. I thought about all the times my own mother meant well, the way she'd rearrange my kitchen when she visited, correct the way I folded Robert's shirts, tell me which colors flattered my age. I used to swallow my irritation and say, "That's just how she is." Now, hearing Zoe's words, I wondered if she'd said the same about me. At noon, I stepped outside, hoping the air might clear something. The garden lay bare, winter had stripped it to its bones. I knelt beside the hydrangeas, brushing soil from the base. They'd bloom again come spring. They always did. But now they stood dry and stubborn, their branches rattling softly in the wind. A memory surfaced the year Daniel was born. My mother had come to help. She'd filled my freezer, folded laundry, held the baby, as if she owned the patent on comfort. I'd been grateful mostly, but I also remembered standing in the hallway one night listening as she told Robert, "She's doing her best, bless her, but she still doesn't burp him long enough." I hadn't said anything then. I just turned back into the nursery and rocked my son until dawn, trying to prove her wrong. Now I saw it clearly, the pattern repeating itself, stitch for stitch. That afternoon, I called an old friend, Carol. She'd retired from teaching 2 years after me, moved across town to be near her daughter. "I haven't heard from you in weeks," she said. "Everything all right?" I hesitated. "I think I'm outdated." Carol chuckled. "We all are. That's what makes us vintage." "I mean it, Carol. I keep trying to help Daniel and Zoe, and every time I make things worse." "You've always been the fixer," she said gently. "It's who you are. Maybe it's who I was," I said. "Now it just feels like I'm sewing patches no one asked for." "Listen," she said. "When my daughter got married, I tried to plan her kitchen layout. Thought I was being helpful. She told me I was rearranging her life. It took me a while to see the difference." "What did you do?" Carol laughed softly. "Nothing. That's the trick. I stopped doing. And it worked." Eventually, she said, "They started coming to me, asking for recipes, advice, babysitting. Turns out when you stop knocking, sometimes they open the door themselves." That night, I sat in the living room with a notebook. I wrote, "Love isn't measured by what you give, but by how you wait." A mother's hands don't have to be full to be useful. I stared at the words until they blurred, then folded the page neatly and tucked it between the pages of my Bible, not as a prayer, just a reminder. Still, the ache lingered, so I decided to take Carol's advice literally to stop doing. No calls, no visits, no casseroles, just quiet. Days passed, then a week. I filled the hours with reading, gardening, walking the aisles of thrift shops I'd ignored for years. I smiled at strangers. I baked for myself. I even started sketching a new quilt, not for Daniel or Zoe, but for me. It felt strange at first making something with no audience, but slowly the silence turned from punishment to peace. Until one morning the phone rang, Mom Daniel's voice. "Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay?" "Yeah," he said quickly. "Zoe's been under the weather. Stress, I think. She's overworked. I was wondering if you could—" He paused. "Actually, no, never mind. She probably wouldn't want Daniel," I said softly. "Tell me." "She could use some soup," he admitted, "but she's stubborn. She'll insist she's fine." I smiled faintly. "You married your mother." He laughed. "Don't tell her that." "I won't." "What kind does she like, chicken and rice?" he said. "She used to love yours." The words filled something inside me that had been empty too long. I didn't ask for permission, but I didn't show up either. I left the pot on their porch, wrapped in foil, still warm, with a note, "For strength, not advice." "Love, Helen." That night a text arrived from Zoe. The soup was perfect. "Thank you. You didn't have to." I replied simply, "I wanted to." 3 dots. Then it meant a lot. The next morning I sat at my kitchen table and opened my sketchbook again. The new quilt had taken shape: soft blues, quiet whites, a few mismatched squares just for honesty. In one corner I wrote a name, Bridges, because that's what I wanted now, not lessons, not apologies, just a way to cross over. As I pinned the first pieces, sunlight spilled across the table, warm and steady. The world outside was still winter, but I could almost feel spring gathering behind it, waiting for permission to bloom. And for once I didn't rush it. Some things, some hearts unfold in their own time. It had been 3 weeks since the soup. I hadn't heard much from Daniel or Zoe, but the quiet no longer felt cruel. It was something gentler space that breathed instead of pressed. I filled my days with small things: trimming the rose bushes, reorganizing my fabric drawers, baking bread for the neighbor's boy who'd just started college. Life felt smaller but peaceful, manageable. Then one Thursday morning the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I was elbow deep in dough hands, dusted white, but something in the sound, sharp, urgent, made me reach for it. Mom Daniel's voice came fast, ragged. "Hey, are you home?" "Of course," I said, wiping flour on a towel. "What's wrong?" "It's Zoe," he said, breath catching. She collapsed at work. They think it's exhaustion, but they're keeping her for tests. For a moment, the room tilted. "What hospital?" "St. Mark's." "I'm on my way. I'll meet you there." He started to protest. "Mom, you don't have to." But I'd already hung up. There are instincts that don't age. When someone you love is hurt, you move. The drive was a blur. Red lights, rain streaking across the windshield, the wipers clapping in time with my heart. I hadn't been to St. Mark's since Robert's surgery all those years ago. The parking lot looked the same: wide, sterile, unforgiving. Inside, everything smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon floor wax. Nurses moved briskly, eyes kind but distant, the way people are when they carry too much sadness to notice one more. I found Daniel near the elevators, hunched in a chair, elbows on knees. His suit jacket hung from his shoulders like a borrowed shell. He looked up when I called his name, eyes rimmed red, voice small. "She just passed out mid-meeting. They said her blood pressure's low. She hasn't been sleeping or eating right." I touched his arm. "You're here now. That's what matters." He nodded, then sank back into the chair. "They're running tests. I don't even know what to ask. So I did what mothers do when words fail. I sat beside him. We said nothing for a long while, listening to the shuffle of nurses and the distant rhythm of heart monitors. Finally he sighed. "Mom, I don't know how to help her anymore. She's always trying to prove something at work, at home with you. With me, I asked quietly. He rubbed his temples. She worries you think she's not enough, that she doesn't do things right. She's scared you'll always see her as less. My throat tightened. I never wanted that. I know, he said, but she doesn't. I watched the elevator doors open and close across from us, silver panels catching the reflection of our faces, 2 generations, both guilty of loving too much in the wrong direction. A nurse finally appeared. Family for Zoe Winters. Daniel stood. That's us. She's awake, the nurse said. You can see her now. Zoe looked pale against the white sheets, her hair pulled back loosely, an IV tracing down her arm. When she saw us, she smiled weakly. Hey. Daniel rushed to her side, brushing a hand over her forehead. You scared me. I'm fine, she murmured. Just tired. That's what you always say, he whispered. I stayed near the doorway, unsure whether my presence was comfort or clutter. But when Zoe's eyes found mine, something in her softened. Hi, Helen, she said. Hi, sweetheart, I replied. You gave us quite a fright. She laughed, a small, brittle sound. I guess I did. Do they know what happened? Dehydration stress, she said. I've been skipping meals. Deadlines piled up. I thought I could handle it. Daniel gave her a look, half exasperation, half love. You don't have to handle everything. Zoe glanced down, then back at me. Guess that runs in the family. The words hit gentle but deep. For the first time, she wasn't accusing, just naming it. I stepped closer carefully. May I sit? She nodded. I pulled a chair beside her bed. Her hands were cold. I wrapped one in mine without thinking. Rest now, I said. The world can wait. For once, she didn't argue. We stayed most of the day. Daniel fielded calls from her office, making sure her boss knew she'd be out. I fetched coffee, tissues, and water. Not commands, just service quiet and offered. When Zoe dozed off, I sat watching her chest rise and fall, remembering all the women I'd known who mistook endurance for strength. My mother used to say, if you stop, the house falls. But no one ever asked who held the woman who held the house. When Zoe stirred, I smoothed the blanket. She blinked at me. You didn't have to stay. I wanted to. She studied me for a long moment. You're different lately. I smiled. Maybe I'm learning. From me. From silence, I said. And from mistakes. Her eyes glistened. I make those too. Then we're in good company. For the first time, she reached for my hand. Not because she needed it, because she wanted it. That night, after Daniel drove me home, I stood in my kitchen staring at the clock. The house felt full again, not with noise, but with purpose. I brewed tea, poured 2 cups, and placed one across the table as if Zoe might walk in any minute. She didn't, of course, but the gesture mattered. It reminded me care doesn't always have to be seen to be real. Before bed, I texted Daniel. Tell Zoe I'm proud of her. Rest is a kind of courage. He replied minutes later. She smiled when I read that. I turned off the lamp, letting the soft darkness settle. Somewhere inside me, a stitch I hadn't realized was loose finally pulled tight. Zoe came home from the hospital 2 days later. Daniel called to tell me she was resting, that the doctor had prescribed time off, which Zoe apparently treated like a punishment. She keeps trying to open her laptop, he said, exasperated. I might hide it. Tell her it'll still be there when she's better, I said. He chuckled. You can tell her yourself. She's been asking about you. That small sentence, asking about you, warmed me in a way nothing else could. For months, I'd been the one reaching. Now someone was reaching back. I waited a day before visiting. When I arrived, I brought no food, no flowers, no advice, just a book of poems and a quiet smile. Zoe answered the door herself, hair loose, sweater hanging soft over her shoulders. You look better, I said. She shrugged. Better than fainting anyway. May I come in? Of course. The house smelled faintly of citrus and candle wax. A throw blanket lay across the couch, a mug beside it half full of tea. For once, the space looked lived in rather than staged, a home, not a showroom. Zoe gestured to the sofa. Sit, please. I did, folding my hands in my lap, waiting for her to set the tone. She joined me, tucking her feet under her. For a moment we sat in silence. Then she sighed. You know, I didn't realize how much I was carrying until I stopped. That's how it works, I said softly. The weight's invisible until you set it down. She smiled faintly. You sound like one of your quilt metaphors. Occupational hazard. We both laughed. Then she looked at me. Really looked. Can I ask you something? Anything. Were you always this certain? When you were younger, the question startled me. Certain about how to do things, how to love, how to show it. I exhaled. No, I just got good at pretending. Zoe tilted her head. Pretending. When I was your age, everything felt like a test. Marriage, motherhood, even kindness. My mother taught me that good women never rested, never questioned. So I didn't. I thought if I followed every rule, love would stay. Did it? I smiled sadly. Not always. Sometimes it just shifted. She was quiet for a long moment. That must have been lonely. It was, I said, but it made me useful, and being useful was how I survived. Her eyes glistened. Maybe that's why we clash. You show love by doing. I show it by trying not to need anything. I reached for her hand, and somewhere between us love got lost. But maybe she said squeezing back it just needed directions. Over the next week I visited often, but only when invited. Sometimes we'd talk for hours about nothing, her work, my garden, the absurdity of modern dating shows. Other times we'd sit in easy silence sipping tea. Each visit felt like another stitch in a seam we'd both torn by accident. One afternoon she surprised me. I found your quilt, she said. I froze. The one I brought that day. She nodded. I was cleaning up and saw it still in the chair. I unwrapped it and she smiled softly. It's beautiful, Helen. My throat tightened. I didn't mean to force it on you. I know, she said, but I'm glad you did. It feels like warmth I didn't know I needed. I added wildflowers in the corner, I admitted. They reminded me of you. Zoe laughed a real laugh, bright and easy. Unpredictable, resilient. Her eyes shimmered. That's kind. It's true. She looked down at her hands, tracing the edge of her sleeve. You know, I used to think you wanted to change me. But now I think you just wanted to make sure I wasn't cold. I smiled. Both can be true, she grinned. You and your both. I lifted my cup. Balance keeps the quilt from unraveling. We laughed again, but something heavier sat underneath gratitude, maybe, or recognition. The way two people realize they've been walking parallel roads all along. Later that evening, as I was leaving, Zoe called after me. Helen, I turned. Thank you, she said, for waiting, for staying. The words caught in my chest. I wanted to say, you don't have to thank me. This is what mothers do. But I stopped myself, because not every truth needs to be spoken. Some are better sewn quietly into the fabric of a day. I simply nodded. Always. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was troubled, because my heart was full, in a way it hadn't been for years. I walked into the sewing room, flicked on the lamp, and spread my latest project across the table. The pieces were uneven, mismatched colors, asymmetrical shapes, but they belonged together. I stitched long into the night, humming softly to myself. Outside, the wind rustled the hydrangeas, and somewhere in the dark I could almost hear my mother's voice. A good wife serves first. But now it sounded different, less command, more memory, a relic from a language that had simply aged out of use. As the needle whispered through the cloth, I whispered back, a good woman loves without measure and knows when to stop stitching. The fabric warmed beneath my hands, alive with motion. I thought of Zoe, her sharp edges, her tired eyes, her laugh that still startled me with its youth, and realized how wrong I'd been. She wasn't trying to erase me. She was trying to build her own pattern, and all I had to do was stop rearranging her pieces. By the time dawn broke, the quilt was nearly finished. In the last square, I embroidered something small, just for her. Different doesn't mean apart. I set down the needle and exhaled. The room felt lighter. So did I. The next day, Daniel called. "You've created a monster," he joked. "Zoe's making soup from scratch." I laughed. "Then she's braver than I was at her age. She said she wants to have you over this weekend." "Just you, me." "Yeah. Says she has something to show you." When I hung up, I stood by the window watching the morning light slide across the floorboards. It struck me then real love is never tidy. It's messy, uneven, full of missed stitches and rough edges. But if you keep working at it, if you stay patient, the pattern starts to reveal itself. I didn't know what Zoe wanted to show me. Maybe the finished bedroom, maybe the quilt, maybe something smaller, a gesture, a peace offering. Whatever it was, I knew one thing. This time I'd knock, and when she opened the door, I'd wait for her to say, "Come in." The morning of my visit, the air smelled like rain. Not the sharp kind that chills you, but the soft, waiting kind that hangs above rooftops like a promise. I stood on the porch with a small jar of honey in my hand, a gift nothing more, and stared at Zoe's front door. It looked different now. Not intimidating, not closed. Just a door. I knocked lightly. Footsteps approached. Then the latch clicked, and there she was. Zoe, cheeks flushed, hair tied back loosely, eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen before. "You made it," she said, smiling. "I wouldn't miss it." She stepped aside, motioning me in. "Daniel's out grabbing coffee. But I wanted you to come early. There's something I need to show you." Inside the house felt warmer, not just from the heat, but from the little touches that told a story. A blanket draped over the arm of the couch, a pair of slippers by the stairs, the quilt I made folded neatly across the back of a chair. I caught my breath at the sight of it. "You kept it," I murmured. "Of course I did." She reached out, smoothing a corner. "It's part of us now." That simple sentence, "part of us," loosened something deep inside me. For months, I'd been trying to find my place. Maybe it wasn't beside her or behind her. Maybe it was woven quietly into the fabric of her life, steady but unseen. "Come with me," Zoe said softly. "There's more." She led me down the hallway. The door at the end, once their guest room, I thought was slightly ajar. Light spilled through the crack, warm and golden. When she pushed it open, I stopped. The room was transformed, walls the color of buttercream, a rocking chair near the window, and in the center, a small white crib gleaming softly under the morning light. My hand flew to my mouth. "Oh, Zoe." She smiled, tears already in her eyes. "We wanted to tell you in person." I turned to her, my heart stumbling in my chest. "You're—" She nodded, laughing through the tears. 3 months. I reached for her before I knew I'd moved. We held each other, the air thick with joy and disbelief, all those months of silence, of clumsy love and hard lessons they'd led here. To this room, to this heartbeat that would soon fill the air. When I finally stepped back, I noticed a folded bundle on the dresser. "Fabric." "What's that?" I asked. Zoe's grin widened. "That's what I wanted to show you." She lifted the bundle, unfolding it carefully. I started sewing. I blinked. "You—" "I found your old notes in the pocket of the quilt," she said. "You must have tucked them there, little sketches, scraps of thread. I thought maybe I could try." She spread the fabric out across the crib. It was rough, uneven, but beautiful. Patches of soft green and yellow, tiny stars stitched clumsily in the corners. "It's not perfect," she said quickly, almost shy. "The lines are crooked, and I don't know how to—" "It's wonderful," I said, touching the edge. "It's alive." She looked at me, then a mix of pride and vulnerability in her gaze. "Would you help me finish it?" For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I just nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "I'd love to." We worked all afternoon. I showed her how to fold seams, how to keep her stitches even without tightening the thread too much. She laughed each time her needle slipped, and I caught myself laughing too, not because it was funny, but because it felt so easy to breathe beside her now. At one point, she paused and looked up. "You know, I used to think you did everything to prove something. And now," she smiled, "now I think you did it to hold things together." I looked down at the fabric in my lap, the pieces aligning under my hands. Maybe I did. But some things aren't meant to be held, just witnessed. Zoe nodded slowly. And shared. Especially that, I said. For the next hour, the house was quiet except for the soft rhythm of needles moving through cloth. Outside, the sky darkened. Rain began to tap against the windows. The smell of coffee drifted in as Daniel returned, pausing at the doorway to watch us. Well, he said softly, would you look at that? Zoe laughed. Your mother's teaching me the sacred art. He grinned. I always knew you two would start building something dangerous together. Only if you misbehave, I teased. He kissed Zoe's temple, then mine. I'll take my chances. We all laughed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, laughter didn't feel like something fragile. It felt like home. That evening, after the last stitch was tied, Zoe held up the quilt. It wasn't perfect, the corners tilted slightly. One line of stars danced off-center, but it was honest, made with two sets of hands that had finally learned how to work side by side. We'll put it here, she said, spreading it across the crib, so the baby will know it's loved from both sides. Tears blurred my vision. From every side I whispered. She turned to me, voice low. Helen, thank you for not giving up on us. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Thank you for teaching me that I didn't have to lead to love. For a long while, we stood together in that quiet golden room, two women bound not by blood but by choice. Later, when I got home, I walked into my sewing room. The lamp cast a soft circle over the table. My own unfinished quilt lay there, the one I'd made for myself, all mismatched blues and uneven lines. I ran my hand over it, smiling. Different doesn't mean apart, I whispered again. The house felt different now, not empty but open, like the air itself had shifted lighter somehow. I sat down, threaded the needle, and began to sew, not to fix, not to fill, but simply because I could. The stitches came easy, steady. Outside rain whispered against the window. I imagined Zoe in her own house, the new quilt folded over the crib, Daniel's laughter in the next room. And somewhere beyond that, the faint flutter of a heart still forming proof that love once mended multiplies. When I tied off the last knot, I looked down at the quilt and smiled. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was whole. And so was I. Epilogue. The language of hands. Months later, I found myself back in that same nursery holding a bundle of soft blankets and sweeter breath. The baby's fingers curled around mine, tiny and sure. Zoe leaned back in the rocking chair, eyes half closed. He likes you. He has good taste, I said softly. She smiled. We named him Robert. I felt the tears before I could stop them. After, she nodded. We wanted him to carry something from you. I pressed a kiss to the baby's head. Then he already has. The little one stirred, sighing in that small, miraculous way babies do. I rocked gently, humming without realizing the same tune my mother once sang when she thought no one was listening. Zoe watched me quietly. You know, she said, I used to think we spoke different languages. We did, I said. But some words sound the same no matter who says them. Like what I looked down at Robert, his breath soft against my arm, his fist still wrapped around my finger. Like love. The room was warm and the light slanted just so, catching on the quilt that hung over the crib, the one we made together. Each stitch a story, each patch a piece. And for the first time in my long, noisy life, I didn't feel the need to teach or prove or fix. I just felt thankful, because sometimes the greatest gift a mother can give and a daughter can accept is not a lesson but a hand held steady through the silence.